You'll find that we're back in Parshat Re'eh in the middle of Devarim chapter 14, verse 22. And you might ask yourself, why are we, taking the scroll backwards? Aren't we about to hit Simchat Torah? And we go backwards in order to pick up the calendar. And I just want to highlight a few features about the calendar. We read this parsha as a result of our festivals probably more than in any other parsha, simply because we have enough festivals, right? Every parsha gets one reading, but this one gets many. So it's on page 1074 is where you would see our Torah reading beginning. And it goes through the whole Regalim cycle. So it begins, right, with actually the tithe that you're supposed to make and then take up to Jerusalem, kind of introducing the concepts of tithes and introducing the concept in particular of the tithe to the Levite, to the poorer Levi, right, who has no hereditary portion. And every third year you're supposed to bring in that specific tithe. So you can see that we're not just paying attention to 1 year at a time, but there's actually a 3-year cycle, something we continue to use in our reading of the Torah, right? We're on a 3-year cycle, not just on an annual cycle like many others are. And then in chapter 15, we get the kind of big calendrical cycle. Parshat Re'eh takes us to every 7th year. Miketz Sheva Shanim, at the end of every 7th year, Ta'aseh Shemitah. And we get the Shemitah cycle that then rolls into the Yovel cycle. And it connects it immediately to the need to address poverty with our calendar, right? Efes ki lo yeh v'cha evyon, there shall not be anyone needy among you. And I've preached on that and the sort of apparent contradiction between it and the very next paragraph, verse 7. This is page 1077. Ki yeh v'cha evyon, but when there is among you someone who is poor and needy, what should you do? One of your kinsmen, right, shall open his hand and give to that person so that they stop being needy. We've had that talk. That's not today's Devar. What I'm interested in, and then from dealing with these, a third year cycle for the giving to the poor. We then have the 7-year cycle for the Shemitah practice and for the releasing of debts. And then in the Yovel, we have the total release. The releasing of Hebrew servants, right? And they all have to return to freedom. They're sort of divinely desired, not natural state, but their divinely desired state. And then we also have in the Yovel year the release of all debt so that people aren't trapped in poverty. The calendar is specifically trying to address poverty throughout. And then in chapter 16, right, it starts with the month of Aviv. Shemor et Chodesh HaAviv ve'asita Pesach l'Adonai Elohecha. Chodesh HaAviv is such a beautiful phrase, right? The month of spring. Well, thank God we get much more than a month of spring in this town. We seem to get 3 months of spring, where it may well snow or drop rain on you. But Chodesh HaAviv is referring to Nisan, right? That new year. It's kind of an odd thing to read, right, if we've just come through Rosh Hashanah. We are very much not in Nisan, right? We've just been doing the Tishrei start to the year. And it reminds us that the Jewish calendar has all these starting points. Where does it start? And then it will take us through the 3 regalim that we're supposed to do, right? It takes us through Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot that we're just concluding right now, reminding us that in some sense we're ending the year. Another New Year tradition, you might put it within the whole month of New Year startings, is going to start tonight or tomorrow when we come to Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah restarts our cycle of reading Torah. And so, in a very real sense, for those of us who are kind of measuring out our time by the Parsha, it restarts our year of Torah learning, of the Torah study cycle. So we have a lot of different new years, and I want to draw our attention today to some of the dualities that you see going in within our calendar. I sort of view Shmini Atzeret as my bookend on the year, probably because Simchat Torah is about to start our reading all over again, right? The High Holidays feels like perhaps the beginning of the year for our community because we all gather in a really serious way, Rosh Hashanah, but that kind of begins the month of beginnings for me. And it isn't done until we've gotten to Sukkot and finished out the third of the 3 festivals and then begun our reading again. You might actually look for multiple starting points there. But first, let's just look at this duality between Sukkot, which will launch our fall new year, right? Versus, I'm using the biblical terms as opposed to Rosh Hashanah, right? Versus the month of spring, right? Chodesh Aviv that we read about today. The Pesach start to the new year. Those are fairly different ways of thinking about the start of the year. In the one, you're able to look back on a harvest completed, right? These are harvest huts that we've built out here in our Sukkot, at least originally they probably were. You've seen everything that's come in. You can look backwards. You have the benefit of hindsight, the year in review, right? And supposedly hindsight is 20/20, supposedly. I'm not sure if it's quite 20/20. I think we distort even that just a little bit in our memory. But it's certainly better than expecting the future. Whereas Aviv, right, that's the festival around the Pesach, right, the lamb, new life. Something has just come into the world and we're looking forward at the long summer months, the growing months. In that case, you're looking forward, not backwards. I want to draw also on our calendar throughout, right, is all about, it's split between Shabbat and Chag, or Regel, however you want to refer to that, right? Shabbat is a sitting, weekly holiday. You stay in your place. You don't want to walk too far. A Regel, you're supposed to get up and start walking however long it takes you to get to Jerusalem. It might take you 2 days. It might take you a week. It might take you 2 weeks if you live as far as Dan in the north, which is not a great place to live if you're gonna schlep a month for each Regel. Wow. If you're gonna get to Jerusalem each time, that's a lot of transit time. They're necessarily different, right? Shabbat is primarily about the time, right? It's the seventh day. This time is clearly defined as holy, whereas Regel says this place over here is holy. So you got to get there. You got to show up in order to be there. So we have a duality that sets out the holiness of time, right from the beginning of creation, right? God's example to rest on the seventh day versus the holiness of place. Today we were able to say both of those, right? We were able to say, all the Be'ahava language in the Amidah, and we'll hear it again in the Musaf Amidah. You give us this in love, and all the Menucha language, all the rest language, together with Mikra Kodesh, a holy convocation, a gathering, people coming from far away, because you have to be together on the holiday. That was part of why it was so important for me to actually be able to see one another come Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because they have that quality of Mikra Kodesh, right? A holy gathering of everyone. We have these 3 times, shalosh pe'amei bashana, right? Yira'eh lefanai. You should appear on these 3 periods before God. And then on the other hand, we have these cycles of 7, right? The Shemitah year and the Yovel year on the 7th. And of course, just within a year, you have on the 7th day. So you have 3 different kinds of 7s that we're tracking throughout them. So these numbers play a key role. And actually, while Shabbat sort of seems endless, it's sort of continuously coming, and Shabbat takes precedence over all the holidays, as in its observances have to come first. Other than Yom Kippur, in which case we would actually fast on the Shabbat. I think we've done that together since I've been here. But it's a highly unusual thing. You don't want to end up fasting on Shabbat. Normally that's considered a Chilul Hashem. You're supposed to feast on Shabbat, not fast, right? But Shabbat is the most essential piece of the Jewish calendar, and yet there's a kind of stasis about it. It's deeply cyclical. Each of the festivals has a part of a story to tell us, right? There's the story of the coming out of Egypt, right? We always talk about them as Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim throughout our prayers. We're connected specifically to events in the past and seeing our lives in terms of those stories that are ongoing. Pesach is about leaving Egypt, right? Sukkot is about traveling through the wilderness. Shavuot, in some sense, actually is an agrarian holiday, the early spring harvest bringing up Bikurim, and refers to almost, completion in the land. That might be seen actually, though it comes second in time in the calendar, it might be seen actually as kind of the culmination of the 3 festivals. In each and every case, our observances are supposed to make us more holy, the people, right? So notice that in our davening, we say, Mekadesh Israel vehazmanim, that God is the one who makes Israel holy and the times holy. But it's an interesting thing, despite God making us holy, God sanctifying us, the authority over when to call the Chagim is put into human hands. Whereas Shabbat, there's just no question about it, right? This is to be a piece of the Brit, an ot of the Brit forever, right? There's really no, I guess that someone might have to calculate when sunset has happened, so we could do that beforehand, but there's no decision. Whereas the question of when is the month and how to intercalate the calendar, that's going to be left to a human court, right? The Jewish calendar is so complicated in part because it's dealing with some of these differing aspects of calendar, but also because it's not only a solar calendar, right? We're not just trying to set our time by the rhythms of the sun having made its annual circuit, but also by the moon, which is sort of manifestly given as a sign of the times and yet has a very irregular, it doesn't break up into days very easily, into a regular set of days, right? We don't have a single integer for the moon. And so we hold both. We don't just do according to the Christian calendar, the solar calendar, or just according to the Muslim calendar, the lunar calendar. We have both. In fact, you might see our tradition as the rich font from which each of these then take their more limited, unique ways. Each of our festivals also has a profound universal message that it's trying to bring, and a profoundly specific Jewish message, a little Jewish story, a story that has just to do with us, right? So in contrast, probably the holidays that have the most to do with everyone are actually Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where we crown God as King of the whole world. B'yom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shmo echad. In that day, God will be one and his name will be one, meaning everyone will talk about God the same way. They'll be addressing the same God, is what u'shmo echad means, that we end with Aleinu each time. By contrast, we have these stories in each of the regalim that have specifically to do with Israelite history, straight out of the Torah, right? Pesach, our redemption from our liberation from Egypt, and Sukkot, our traveling through the wilderness, and Shavuot, inheriting our land and being able to bring its first fruits. But throughout, we never let go of that sense that there's a universal meaning to all of this. And that was my emphasis at the beginning of this holiday, is that Sukkot really is for everybody. Those booths that we build, those are hosting venues for hosting everyone, specifically the non-Jew, the stranger who's among us, included with all the poor. And people well beyond our families are supposed to be in our sukkahs, right? Sukkot is sort of the overflow seating for people. Something I love about this calendar is that it's incredibly complex and that it causes us to really think about the quality of time, a major theme for us this morning, right? If it was the psalm that we read, Psalm 90, right at the beginning, if it was Kohelet that Barry just sang out to us about the value of human labor and sort of our struggle against time and how we cannot fundamentally win against time. But I think something that you know intuitively in your kishkas as a fellow Jew is that when we plug ourselves into this time frame, these cycles of 3s and 7s, these universal and particular themes, these handful of new years, that we, by engaging in time as holy, reach out for something that is truly timeless, something that lifts and ennobles our own times, teaching us to make our days count, as Psalm 90 says, but that also we know full well will live on beyond us, will be implanted in history as a kind of structure to help it make sense and to inspire the generations after us to pick up the work where we leave off. In some sense, I think that the Torah service complements the reading of Kohelet. Kohelet, remember, is only looking at the purview of the individual, What will all an individual's labors profit him? What is all that amal worth? Amal has this sense of hard, vigorous, sweaty work. You just see everything kind of, return to its prior state. How can we conquer time? Individuals cannot. That's true. But the point was never you or I anyhow. The point was to engage in a breed which is so much bigger than any one of us, and that allows us to tie our story to a story that began a very long time ago and will continue long after us. Well, I hope that contemplating the calendar today has helped you see the completion of it with more clear eyes, and I look forward to the celebration and some online dancing tonight as we start the cycle of time over again. And with that, we're going to turn toward Yizkor. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. Thanks.